identify our enemy, how to get rid of our illusions. His message to the grassroots, dealing with the land question and dealing truth with revolution, was one of the finest revolutionary statements made in our times. And his ballads of the bullets, second only to his speech message to the grassroots. Each one of these speeches were made in Reverend Clarke's church, the Shrine of the Black Madonna, in Detroit. Malcolm X related to the radical black ministry. He was the later day reincarnation of radical black ministers that goes back far into our history, thousands of years. In many ways, we have seen the Malcolm X type before in our history. Although we did see him before, but let's pick him up. Around 1360 BC, in the presence of Akhenaten, a sickly boy called Amenhotep IV, who came to power as Akhenaten. He did not really crave power. It was his time, so he assumed the responsibility. He really wanted to play with Nefertiti and cousins and wrote poetry. He thought so much of life he would not crush a flower. When finally he came to power, he did something that was revolutionary and radical. He outlawed warfare. He was a king of peace. Now you want to know how he relates to Malcolm, if he was a king of peace. He was a radical king of peace. He said that all the nations under Egyptian domination who wish their freedom would not have to fight for it. But if they want to be free, we'll give it to them. Many historians hate him and think he dissolved the Egyptian empire of that day. Walter Weigel, in his book Great Personalities of Integrity, calls his chapter on Akhenaten The Adventures of a Nigger King. He was somewhat homely by present-day status, long, elongated head, thick lips, big nose. Yet Nefertiti, who married him, thought he was so handsome, she would steal into the throne room and take little peeks at him like sipping old rare wine. Behold this handsome man I married. They humanized the Egyptian monarch, permitted people to sculpture them, showing affection with children on their knees. He's a man who wrote poetry. He's often being given credit for giving the world monotheism. That credit is wrong. The Jews have been given credit for giving the world monotheism. That credit is even more wrong. The Jews heard about monotheism and announced it and got the credit. Akhenaten never said he gave the world monotheism. All Akhenaten is to give the world back what it had before. Now I'm going to show you how he relates to Malcolm X. The world had monotheism, a concept of the oneness of God. Corrupt preachers, corrupt priests began to tell the people, I am your emissary to God, and my power is in this area. If you go over here, you're out of my power. And so people will be fleeced based on the fact they were under different priests with limited power. And the priests began to exploit the power. What Akhenaten did was to give them back what they had before. What Malcolm X did for us is to try to give us back what we had before. Not to give us a new concept, but use new methodology to reclaim some old things that gave us strength that we had stopped appreciating. Malcolm X taught us how to look at our enemy a different way, but to at least identify him and to know that you can't fight the slave master and sleep with him at the same time. That if you love the slave master's daughter, you have less love for your own. And he began to identify this very clearly. He began to show us something about the radical manifestation of ourselves. Now let's pick up Malcolm X's life and see if we can look at the making of the man. A man is being made in the womb after a fact. Malcolm X understood that his father, a Garveyite, had his body thrown on his porch and his mother almost growing mad. The mind of the man was being prepared to be what he would later be. He was asking some questions. He would have no problem later on in identifying the people who did it to his father as beasts because they were acting like beasts. He would have no difficulty in identifying them as the devil, because whosoever is in charge of the hell in your life is your devil. Even if he's black. Whoever is in charge of the hell in your life is your devil at that point. So the devil symbol and the beast symbol was something that he used with some kind of consistency. He used the animal symbol, the fox, the bear, the rabbit. This is going back to the old African way of telling stories to illustrate a point. Going back to our folklore, digging deep into this folklore. Now, growing up, being partly orphaned, his mother not too well, going to school, stating his ambitions as kids get up and state their ambition in school. I used to say that I wanted to fly an airplane. But I had all black teachers and all black students, so nobody laughed at me. If a black kid would say this in a white class, then someone would laugh at him. But he was in a white class. When he stated his ambition, they laughed. And so he asked, why shouldn't I be what I want to be? Now the teacher's telling him, Don't take your ambitions too far. Go to shop, be a good carpenter, good mechanic. In other words, be a servant of the society, but never be a master of the society. Be assistant to it, but never be it. But the mind is in revolt against the concept. The mind now must continue its revolt, and he must come through the mire to find the man that he would have to be. Now, growing up, teenager, going to Boston, getting into some difficulty, having a zoot suit period, coming to Harlem, going into Small's Paradise, becoming a taker of dope and a seller of dope, going through that survival mill, trying to stay on earth, almost learning something he would teach others how not to do later. You do not survive at the expense of your brother and your sister. But he was surviving then. He got a reputation, and to survive in that kind of asphalt cement jungle, you need a rep. And to get a rep, you've got to do somebody in to get a rep. You got to push somebody around so people will say, well, he don't stand for nothing. You better leave him alone. So now he's got a rep. Detroit Red. People don't push him. They know that you don't come up against him. He would meet another semi-thug that he would have some questions about. West Indian semi-gangster. But he would move on. There's Smalls hustling tips, hustling women, hustling dope. Then back to Boston. The white women phase, it probably would be overdone in the film. It wasn't that long in the first place, it wasn't that deep. Fortunately, I got to talk to Malcolm a lot about a lot of things. And a whole lot of things are exaggerated. Because when I met him, 1958, when I came back from Africa, I was head of at the World Trade Show building, then on 8th Avenue, of an African Heritage exhibition, displays different things on Africa, and he and his group had 3 booths. Things from the nation, things that people had made with their own hands. He would come in and supervise his group. And he saw, I had a friend who had a lady, a milk lady, as against a chocolate lady. She was Hungarian. So he told her that wait there for him and just hang around me and make sure nobody bothered her. So she was hanging around me, and finally he came and picked her up, and Malcolm X was watching and came over to me. Said that I was never good at imitating his voice, but he said, "That's your woman?" No. Good. I've been around that track, dead end street. So our friendship began when I let him know that wasn't my woman. Then went way in, came back. That was a moment of silence. You got a good reputation around here. People like you. I bet you're a swine eater. I confess that I do like an occasional pork chop. Have been known to partake of chitlins. You thought I wasn't exactly hopeless. One day I might be saved from degradation, the pig. So in the years that we knew each other, he said, you know, I'm going to give you 99 and leave that swine alone. I'm going to give you 100. Never made 100 in his lifetime. Well, about 10 years ago, for health reasons, not for religious reasons, for health reasons, doctors told me to toe down on sweets, red meats, leave pork out altogether. And when I divorced myself from the swine, oh damn, Malcolm is not here to pray. He would have been happy. Know that I finally quit that swine. Because he was dead on my case. But he was a person with great humor. Very few people got to know him that well. No. Let's go back to the chronology of his life. Let's go back to that Boston scene and finally getting caught. And let's go back to the jail, because one thing about a jail is that you're static, you can't go no place, can't keep no appointments. And you're trapped. And the one person you cannot get away from is yourself. You do the one thing which most people should do all the time, automatically, but they will not do it automatically. Take a good look at themselves. So he had time to look at himself. He had time to discipline himself. He had time to be concerned about the conditions in the prison. This will not come out in the movies, but there are letters in existence. We now know, Malcolm, prison letters. We now have them. Spike Lee had them in his hand. So there ain't no excuse. Writing letters to the warden about the condition of other prisoners, while Malcolm X gradually was pulling away from the others with self-discipline. He was an influence in the prison because of his self-discipline and the way he approached life itself. Then finally his brother and other associations introduced him to the concept of Islam. This now is a form of discipline in his life. This discipline led to his reading, not being good at words. He began to study words and his study methods. While they were good, but totally impractical, he took the dictionary and started at A. Went straight through the dictionary. And yet, when you heard him speak, his speech had that you can whistle. When he said something, it was so simple, you could remember it a year later. When Dr. King spoke, the one thing you remember, he spoke so pretty, so eloquent. But what did he say? We still know exactly what Malcolm said. After all these years, those of us who heard him still remember what he said. Because he said it with such simplicity and such beauty. He illustrated what he said. He was learning this. His apprenticeship to himself, in that solitude and the silence, yet not thinking about himself all the time, thinking about other people in prison, protesting about how they were treated. He was becoming a man with a mission. He was learning leadership and leadership responsibility. That you do not live in this world just for yourself alone. That you connect with other people in the world. And if you have strength, you use that strength sometimes to raise your voice for others who lack the strength to do so for themselves. He was beginning to do this in prison. Finally, after his prison period, his reading, he would find the Father that was thrown on that porch. He would find in Elijah Muhammad the Father that he loved. He would talk about that relationship, but they miss a whole lot of points. He adopted Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad spiritually adopted him. Began to train him and to give him caliber assignments. He in turn began to serve in such a way that it benefited the nation. Elijah Muhammad's sons were driving cabs, busting dishes, doing ordinary jobs. When Malcolm X left Detroit and Chicago to come to New York to head the march, all of them had substantial, well-paying jobs within the structure of the nation. Part of his planning. Now he would come to New York and become the spokesman for Elijah Muhammad. Being the spokesman, coming at the period of the civil rights movement and protest movement, he would be the man to speak for the nation before this nation. And the people who did not know Elijah Muhammad knew Malcolm X. And very often, when Malcolm X said, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us, behind that phase, Malcolm X was teaching original and powerful lessons of his own, over and beyond anything Elijah Muhammad ever thought about. This was a son's respect for his spiritual father. Amen. This is a father and son relationship that we need to examine. I don't think anything like this is going to come out in Spike Lee's film, because he's so obsessed with sex and sensation. It won't come out. I remember in the 20 minutes Spike Lee spent in my house, it really was only 20 minutes now. He might say I consulted people who knew him personally. He did. 20 minutes for the record. I told him, I said, look, there are certain foreign films, Japanese films, England, Bergman films, Scandinavian, where so much power is in the silence. Can you capture Malcolm X's silence? Can you capture him listening? He was a great listener. He would listen to you. Then play back what he heard from you, letting you know what he learned, and take the conversation beyond where you had placed it without offending you. That's thinking. Beautiful thinking, beautiful analysis of the mind. Now, he had a shallow cabinet. Very few people seem to know this. Malcolm X had a cabinet of non-Muslims who gave him information. I was in the history cabinet. Each time he wanted something on history, he'd call me, I'd give him a folder. And he'd go through the folder and pick out what he needed. One time, he was going to debate 3 college professors on the Congo situation. He called for a folder and I gave it to him. His man picked it up at 7. Malcolm X said he only glanced at it at 9. He only had time to read thoroughly, glance through the newspaper clippings. And one thing I had, a little pamphlet called King Leopold's Soliloquy by Mark Twain, dealing with the murder in the Congo, cutting off the hands of the women, opening the women's breasts, cutting men's hands off so they didn't deliver enough rubber. That's the only thing he could read thoroughly. At 11 o'clock, he was on the air for 2 hours with these college professors. He reduced them to crying children. Each time they take the conversation away from something he didn't know, he would bring them back to something he did know. He knew about those statistics. He knew about cutting off those hands. He knew about slitting the stomachs of those women. He knew about that genocide. He knew that genocide was worse than the thing in Germany. He said, you're talking about 6 million. Here we have the people into Belgium, into the Congo. They find 31 million people. And they reduced the population to 11 million in less than 10 years. Ain't nobody weeping for us. And you weeping for those people that 6 million, and the people that 6 million was part of those killing the people in the Belgium, in the Congo. They asked us to weep. Why did they weep? Why did they stop killing us in the Congo? He rolled that situation to death. You know, college professors would never entangle with him. One of the college professors said, I will never be on a panel with Malcolm X, ever. Now, publicity-wise, nationwide, he not only was the spokesman, but he was in demand at colleges, at rallies, number of rallies in front of National Memorial Bookstore at 116th Street near the mosque across the street, at rallies. He began to communicate with different people, high level. Gordon Parks became interested in him. A young fighter named Cassius Clay became attracted to Islam through him, changed his name to Muhammad Ali, and when they tried to draft him into the Korean War, had the courage to refuse based on his religion and stood by his conviction and didn't budge. He took a principled stand. It might have been the only principal stand he ever taken, but he did take that one. And he proved that a man, if others can use religion as a reason for not fighting a war they didn't believe in, that the religion of Islam is just as legitimate as any other in this regard. Now, Malcolm X's influence is extending far beyond the nation to the college campus, speeches being reprinted, some without his permission, some bootleg and sold. But he's a figure now. There's beginning to be some jealousy inside the nation because of the intermittent sickness of Elijah Muhammad. It is clear that the logical successor to Elijah Muhammad will be Malcolm. Jealousy is growing up in the fruit of Islam. He had organized the fruit of Islam. He knew them. He knew their temperament. They were not just paramilitary, they were military. Some of them were ex-thugs. Maybe the greatest contribution of Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, and you can't take one without the other. They didn't steal people from the little church or the big church. They took people out there who had no allegiance. They took the neglected people. They took people who had lost confidence in themselves and they made them whole again. Young men who had given up on soap, now taking regular baths, regular shaves, clean as a whistle. It was a wonderful thing to go to the mosque, to go to the restaurant, and see a brother step back and let the sisters by. A kind of respect that you wasn't seeing elsewhere. To see the schools, see the proliferation of steak and tape restaurants, good sandwiches, man. I wish they had them now. Not that I can handle it. It'd be a good thing. The price was decent. Teaching enterprise. What they were teaching us is to be a whole nation again. Stop being consumers of everything and start producing something. Producing some of the clothes you wear. Be in charge of some of the facilities you wear. And with the farms, produce some of the food. And let's buy food from each other. In the meantime, we are employing each other. My point here is see what Malcolm X would set in motion. And the main thing that with Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, they would set in motion again the concept of nation structure. And if you want to understand them, you have to understand the conveyor belt, the continuation. You got to understand Booker T. Washington, concept of self-reliance. W.E.B. Du Bois' concept of the consolidation of ownership through politics. Then understand the Garveyite roots of the Nation of Islam. And very few people have done this. Eastern Udom in his work, Black Nationalism, a Search for an Identity in America, have done the best book on the roots of Garveyism in the nation. Now, I have often said that most of the members of the nation were just disgruntled Baptists. And that had you found another religion other than Islam, they would have followed that. They just wanted to get away from a religion given to them by their oppressor. And to prove this, I visited several Muslim countries, Arab countries. I've seen the Imam celebrating the ceremony. And there's not a word being said between the constituency and the Imam. Nothing. He's doing all the talking. Now go to the mosque. What are the people saying? All right, brother. Make it plain. That's Baptist. That's a reoccurrence of your Baptist faith. My old Baptist grandmother says that if you're not a Baptist, someone tampered with you someplace. Went down the wrong street. I don't want to get into this because she thought that the only thing in the world she couldn't redeem, forgive was beyond redemption was a method. Sprinkle people. God said nothing about sprinkling. Be immersed in the water. How you gonna get to the pearly gates? God's gonna say, go back and take a bath. It's a dirty method trying to get into heaven. Let's go back to Malcolm. I know about my great-grandmother all day long. That sweet old soul. I'm sure she's smiling down on her favorite child. My point here is that the religious meaning, the spiritual meaning of the movement, it didn't have to be Islam. It was Islam, all right. But it didn't have to be. But it had to be something other than Western concepts of Christianity, a Western concept of religion. Because we had grown sick of religions that not only had not kept their promise to us, but were participants in the slave trade. So we put them all down. The fact that Islam participated in the slave trade too is a fact that eludes us still. But they were in the slave trade as long as anyone else. But at the moment we didn't see it, and today we still don't see it. That's right. That's a subject of another lecture, but not tonight. Now, the development of the nation, the development of its businesses, also caused the development of a hustler type within the nation. It was also suspected that some of the members were on the FBI payroll. John and Lee was the first one that was suspected. The FBI is not going to let anything this powerful exist without looking into it. Now that we can get the FBI files on Malcolm X, all of this can be proven. There was something happening in one of the local police stations, and some of the brothers just gathered around the police station and stood, didn't say a word. And they wasn't going to move until someone sent for Malcolm. Malcolm came and found out what it was all about and got some satisfaction about the situation and just waved his hand. The men disappeared. The police said that no black man got any business with that kind of power. They decided to kill him right there. Right there. He had to go. There's one thing I've said repeatedly. Anytime a black man shows his people the real face of power and what to do about it, he is either assassinated, driven to suicide, or driven into exile. One of three things got to happen to him. The minute Malcolm showed his people the real face of power, he should have been protected 24 hours a day. Then you should watch those who are protecting him and change them often. We haven't learned that lesson. His enemies did not mean what they said. Came the time of the March on Washington. Malcolm X wanted to be a more active participant in the civil rights movement and wanted the nation to be a more active participant in the civil rights movement. His spiritual father, Elijah Muhammad, said, "We are not marching people." So he didn't march. And at a meeting of the nation, a rally, Manhattan Center, Malcolm X did not make this as part of a speech. Most people forget this. He made this as part of an answer to a question. After the death of Kennedy, Malcolm X said, "Chickens coming home to roost." A lot of tales had been going to Chicago about Malcolm. A lot of vicious rumors, back and forth. They were waiting for an excuse to silence him. And this excuse was used to suspend him for a while. Before the suspension was up, it was obvious he was not going to come back into the nation. It was not his doing either. Because the records now exist, the letters now exist. In the last weeks of Malcolm's life, in the last week before the suspension was up, Malcolm X pleaded to Elijah Muhammad to let him come back into the nation and let both of us build this thing together. We have something too good to be wasted. Malcolm X saw in the Nation of Islam the structure of an internal nation within a nation. But the communication did not even get to Elijah Muhammad. And a lot of people gradually turned on him. And among those, Farrakhan, who he had trained, wasn't so nice. A lot of people had to get out of it now. A whole lot of people who came and feasted on his favors did not turn to help him. Finally he left, found the Muslim Mosque Incorporation and the Organization of African American Unity. Went to Africa. People quite always talk about going to Mecca. Of course he went to Mecca. We spent more time in Africa. His main time was to try to bring some unity between Africans in the United States and Africans in Africa. 8 African nations agreed to bring our problem before the United Nations as a human rights problem as against a civil rights problem. He had begun the plan to internationalize the problem in the United States. On his way home, there was an attempt to poison him. and this is something most people had to explain. Malcolm, quite by accident, was quoted by one group of Muslims who was really commercial hustlers who didn't even go to a mosque. These are Muslims who have stores all over the world. Some of them live in Switzerland near their bank accounts. They wanted his favor. Then the more religious group wanted his favor. This might be the basis of the poisoning. Finally, he would come home. He tried to stop in Paris. No. Tried to stop in London. No. Spent some time in Ghana. Wanted to see Nkrumah. Every string was pulled together to see Nkrumah. Finally, when he saw Nkrumah, and he came away with a sad look on his face. He never told anyone what happened. Nkrumah was on the communist kick at the time, married to that Egyptian white woman, whole lot of communist white advisors around him, most of Jews from South Africa. Nkrumah didn't buy that program. Malcolm X was on a Pan-African journey. Nkrumah was now an internationalist. Remember, he was way over there in Asia trying to solve some Asian problems when his government was overthrown. Malcolm X believed in taking care of your own house first. Then unite the rest of the world, but let's get ourselves together first. So understand what Malcolm X believed, and the point with Nkrumah sadly shake his head. The man is missing the point. Nkrumah's appointment secretary was a Zionist Jew. That's enough. Malcolm X now would come back to the United States. He understood if he was held up, kept from entering Paris to speak to his brothers and sisters in Paris, held up, keep into London, that was a force in operation more powerful than the Nation of Islam. He knew there is a style. He knew that that wasn't our style. And besides, we didn't have those kind of connections. We sure couldn't keep him out of Paris. We couldn't keep him out of London. We didn't control anything there. He knew that an international force had been set in motion. And when he came here, after he'd gone to Mecca and came back here, just for a description of Mecca, a lot of people think he was an integrationist. Now, all Malcolm X said, I saw black people, brown people, all white people, all getting along. He made no comment. Everybody said, well, he's now an integrationist. So that's an observation. I spoke to him soon after at the Homopolar Marshal. His attitude toward the white American had not changed one iota. He continued to try to build less behind him than he had before. In the meetings at the Audubon Ballroom, he brought some of the most able speakers from Africa. Then finally he was convinced not to have the search at the door. And the first Sunday he did not have the search was the Sunday they killed him. He should have had the search. Some of his brothers were sharpshooters. And the minute that noise came up, those brothers who had those rifles out. And before anything could start, they'd have dropped him dead. Look, pulled it back, Because every person standing on the stage was a sharpshooter. Every person standing in front of the stage was a sharpshooter. And he had them in the back. Many he pulled off that guard, they killed him. He kind of expected it. He was fatalistic about it, almost saying, go ahead and get it over with. Now what is the legacy? He left us. He left us with a legacy of struggle and commitment. In the first year, the first memorial for Malcolm after he died, I did not know what I was going to say. So I said something and didn't even care whether my audience believed me. I said that Malcolm X and I have been talking all this last year. And he said to me in the final conversation, I had asked him, Malcolm, what can I do? And he said, do your best work. The best thing you can do in memory of me is to do your best work. And I realized that of all the things I wanted to do in life, thanks to the inspiration of a 5th grade teacher, I wanted to be a great classroom teacher. And when I was called into Hunter College, I remembered that. Yes, I said my best work is as a teacher. And in the years since he's been dead, I have trained a generation how to think better of themselves through an understanding of history. This is my memorial to him, and that is a living memorial that will continue as long as I am alive. Thank you.
To this elder right here now. We still got almost 24 copies of his book, of his best work. And if you respect the learning that you participated in tonight, you're going to make it your business to make sure that some of that best learning is a part of your library. So we still have the book. We want to make sure that you get that before you leave. We want to make a few brief announcements, and we'll have a few quick question and answers, and we'll let you go. You know November 4th is Black Solidarity Day, and some of you have flyers for Black Solidarity Day. As we sit here tonight, there is a meeting going on right now about whether or not there will be an emergency demonstration on Black Solidarity Day, November 4th, leading out of the Apollo Theater in support of Dr. Jeffries. We want you to stay tuned. WLIB and WBAI, stay tuned for these announcements. We don't have time to be making phone calls and mailings and whatnot. If we're going to be serious about reconstructing the movement, we got to be able to move like snap. So stay tuned for that. There's some folks we want to acknowledge real quick. Okay.